let's put this over here. I don't really need to see myself. Okay, welcome everybody. And got about 10 minutes until the actual reading starts, and we'll be reading Jane Austen's Persuasion. Chapter 16, or what I call Tryst Tuesday. Hello, welcome. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes at 8 o'clock sharp. And this is going to be a reading of Chapter 16 of Jane Austen's Persuasion. So if you're interested, stick around. Just giving people a moment to get on. Get me time to get all these shenanigans set up. Because I'm streaming on Facebook in about 10 minutes. And then I'll also be loading this up onto Patreon as well. Because this, of course, is a Patreon-supported program. I also do a podcast as well that is the main focus of what I do. But during this pandemic, what I've decided to do is nighttime readings of classics that are in the public domain, so it's illegal for me to read from them. And I have digital copies of them on from Gutenberg.org. That's one of the many places you can get many classics and obscure titles that are in the public domain in digital form, which is a really great website if you want to check that out. But we got about 9 minutes, and the chat is open. If you want to say hello and have any questions, I have you totally open to answering. Tuesday. So 9 minutes. And I need to get everything set up. I got the book, but so I totally want to welcome everybody to another nighttime reading hour. They usually don't last they last about maybe 30 minutes. These are generally what they last. And I do one for every day of the week except for Wednesdays and Saturdays, health permitting. Because sometimes I just can't even, because I have chronic pain. But usually I let people know before I have to cop out on that one. But generally speaking, it's Saturdays and Wednesday nights, which are my days off for these nighttime readings. And if you want the schedule, yesterday, Monday, is Mystery Monday. And right now we're reading Hound of the Baskervilles by Sherlock Holmes by Sir Conan Doyle. Tonight, of course, is Tryst Tuesday, with our current item being Persuasion by Jane Austen, one of my favorites. Wednesdays is, of course, off. Thursdays is Trippy Thursday, and right now we're going to be getting into the second book of the War of the Worlds duology. The second book is a little bit shorter than the first book, but we've gotten through the first book on that one. That's Thursdays. Friday nights is Fairy Tale Fridays, and I've got several collections of fairy tales that I take picks from, and I do requests if you have a fairy tale that you would like read on those Fridays. If I can find it, I'm totally willing to read it, as long as it's public appropriate, because this does go out to the public. So Fairy Tale Fridays, and then Saturdays, once again, it's my day off, and silly Sundays. And right now we're getting through the book Alice in Wonderland, and we're just about halfway through that one. So if you have any recommendations for something silly, surreal for Sundays, or any other recommendations for any of the other days, I'll see if I can get a hold of them off of Gutenberg or other sites that have books that are, once again, in the public domain. which I use for legal reasons. And last Saturday of each month, I also do, I get permission from authors who are just getting started writing, or have just published their first book, and I basically read out a chapter every last Saturday. Haven't been too good at at least recently because of issues. But those chapters stay up for about a month, and then they get taken down because of legal issues and agreements I have with the authors. So that's something I'm doing as well. And then we have the podcast. It is a pagan podcast that comes out every 6 weeks or so. The next one is coming out in the next week and a half. Is going to be for Lunasa. I'm putting the episode together, and that will be up within the next week and a half, up on Patreon, up on YouTube, and also Anchor in its podcast form. But that's pretty much what my life is revolving around at this point. I don't have a lot else going on right now, as many can attest to that it is true. So it is about 4 minutes out. So if you want to grab a drink or get comfortable, we're going to get started in about 4 minutes. I'm going to go grab my water and refill my water bottle because reading takes a little bit of water. So we'll go ahead and give people time to do that. So I will be just right back. I should have a sign that says "Be right back" or something. I will eventually, but that is not today reading. And I'll just type that up in the chat here and fade out the YouTube. Get back. 4 minutes till time. Okay. Be right back. 3 minutes until showtime is in chat, so if you need to take a moment to get a drink, get comfortable, giving you about 3 minutes to do just that as I go downstairs and get my bottle filled. So be right back. I'll stop talking now and actually do what I'm saying I'm going to be doing. Okay. And you're hearing my cat. And he's very camera shy, so sadly he will not be joining us on camera. Okay. His name is Tesla Coil, which is an adorable name. I kind of inherited him. 7:59. Let's get the show on the road. All right. All right, so can I start recording, please? Tuesday, and we'll be starting with chapter 16 of Persuasion. One of my favorites, as I've said. So let's move this, get this over here. My phone is very strange. Okay, so we'll get started with that. Everybody's settled, everybody's situated. All right, let's get this on the road. Chapter 16. Even then, Mr. Elliot's being in love with Elizabeth, which was, her father has come, she could not suppose herself at all wanted. For Elizabeth was replying, in a sort of whisper, that must not be any reason indeed. I assure you, I feel it none. She is nothing to me, compared with you. And she was in full time to hear her father say, My dear madame, this must not be. As yet you have not seen nothing of Bath. You have been here only to be useful. You must not run away from with Mrs. Wallace, the beautiful Mrs. Wallace. To your fine mind, I well know the sight of beauty is a real gratification. He spoke and looked so much in earnest that Anne was not surprised to see Mrs. Clay stealing a glance at, but the praise of the fine mind did not appear to excite a thought in her sister. The lady could not but yield to such joint entreaties, and promised to stay. In the course of the same morning, Anne and her father chancing to be alone together, he began to compliment her on her improved looks. He thought her less thin in her person, in her cheeks, her skin, her complexion, greatly improved, clearer, fresher. Had she been using anything in particular? No, nothing. Merely Gowland, he supposed. No, nothing at all. Ha! He was surprised at that, and added, Certainly you cannot do better than continue as you are. You cannot be better than well, or I should recommend Gowland. The constant use of Gowland during the spring months. Mrs. Clay has been using it at my recommendation, and you see what it has done for her. You see how it has carried away her freckles. If Elizabeth could have heard this, such personal praise might have struck her, especially as it did not appear to Anne that the freckles were at all lessened. But everything must take its chance. The evil of the marriage would be much diminished if Elizabeth were also to marry. As for herself, she might always command a home with Lady Russell. Lady Russell's composed mind and polite manners were put to some trial on this point. And so overlooked was a perpetual provocation to her there, and vexed her as much when she was away, as a person in Bath who drinks the water gets all the new public. As Mr. Elliot became known to her, she grew more charitable, or more indifferent, towards the others. His manners were an immediate recommendation, fully supporting the superficial, that she was at first, as she told Anne, almost ready to exclaim, Can this be Mr. Elliot? And could not seriously picture to herself a more agreeable or estimable man. Everything united in him, good understanding, correct opinions, knowledge of the world, and a warm heart. He lived with the liberality of a man of fortune, without display. He judged for himself in everything essential, without defying public opinion in any point of worldly decorum. He was steady, observant, moderate, candid, never run away with by spirits or by selfishness, which fancied itself strong feeling, and yet with a sensibility to what was amiable and lovely, and of value for all the felicities of domestic life. She was sure that he had not been happy in marriage. Colonel Wallace said it, and Lady Russell saw it, but it had been no unhappiness to sour his mind, nor, she began pretty soon to suspect, to prevent his thinking of a second choice. Her satisfaction in Mr. Elliot outweighed all of the plague of Mrs. Clay. It was now some years since Anne had begun to learn that she and her excellent friend could sometimes do nothing suspicious or inconsistent, nothing to require more motives than appeared in Mr. Elliot's great desire of reconciliation. In Lady Russell's view, it was perfectly natural that Mr. Elliot, at a mature time of life, should feel it a most desirable object, and what would generally recommend him, among all sensible people, to be on good terms with the head of his family, and the simplest process in the world of time, upon a head naturally clear, and only to smile about it, and at last to mention Elizabeth. Lady Russell listened and looked, and made only this cautious reply: Elizabeth. Very well. Time will explain. It was a reference to the future, which Anne, after a little observation, felt she must submit to. She could determine nothing at present, that any particularity of attention seemed almost impossible. Mr. Elliot, too, it must be remembered, had not been a widower 7 months. A little delay on his side might be very excusable, without fearing that she was the inexcusable one, in attributing to him such imaginations. For though his marriage had not been very happy, still it had existed so many years that she could not comprehend a very rapid recovery from the awful impression of its being dissolved. However it might end, he was without any question their pleasantest acquaintance in Bath. She saw nobody equal to him, and it was a great indulgence now and then to talk and to see more of it as herself. They went through the particulars of their first meeting a great many times. He gave her to understand that he had looked at her other persons look also. They did not always think alike. His value for rank and connection she perceived to be greater than hers. It was not merely complaisance. It must be a liking to the cause, which made him enter warmly into her father and sister's solicitudes on a subject which she thought unworthy to excite them. The Bath paper one morning announced the arrival of the Dowager Viscountess Dalrymple, and her daughter, the Honorable Camden Place, was swept away for, in Anne's opinion, most unfortunately, were cousins of the Elliots, and the agony was how to introduce them. Never seen her father and sister before in contact with nobility, and she must acknowledge herself disappointed. She had hoped better things from their high ideas of their own situation in life, and was reduced to form a wish which she had never foreseen, a wish that they had more pride. For our cousins, Lady Dalrymple and Miss Carteret, our cousins, the Dalrymples, sounded in her ears all day long. Sir Walter had once been in company with the late Viscount, and the difficulties of the case arose from here having been a suspension of all intercourse by letters of ceremony ever since the death of that said late Viscount. of a dangerous illness of Sir Walter's at the same time, there had been an unlucky omission at Kilnage. No letter of condolence had been sent to Ireland. The neglect had been visited on the head of the sinner, for when poor Lady Elliot died herself, no letter of condolence was received at Kilnage, and consequently, there was anxious business set to rights, and be admitted as cousins again was the question. It was a question which, in a more rational manner, neither Lady Russell nor Mr. Elliot thought unimportant. Family connections are always worth preserving, good company always worth seeking. Lady Dalrymple had taken a house for 3 months in Laura Place, and would be living in style. She had been at Bath the year before, and Lady Russell had heard her spoken of as a charming woman. It was very desirable that the connection should be renewed, if it could be done, without any compromise of propriety on the side of the Elliots. Sir Walter, however, would choose his own means, and at last wrote a very fine letter of ample explanation, regret, and entreaty to his right honourable cousin. Neither Lady Russell nor Mr. Elliot could admire the letter, but it did all that was wanted, in bringing 3 lines of a scrawl from the Dowager Viscountess. She was very much honoured, and should be happy in their acquaintance. The toils of the business were over. The sweets began. They visited in Laura Place. They had the cars of Carteret to be arranged wherever they might be most visible. Were talked of to everybody. Anne was ashamed. Had Lady Dalrymple and her daughter even nothing. There was no superiority of manner, accomplishment, or understanding. Lady Dalrymple had acquired the name of a charming woman because she had a smile and a civil answer for everybody. Miss Carteret, with still less to say, was so plain and so awkward that she would never have been tolerated in Camden Place but for her birth. Lady Russell confessed that she had expected something better, but yet it was an acquaintance worth having. And when Anne ventured to speak her opinion of them to Mr. Elliot, he agreed to their being nothing in themselves, but still maintained that as a family connection, as good company, as those who would collect good company around them, they had their value. Anne smiled and said, "My idea of good company, Mr. Elliot, is the company of clever, well-informed people, who have a great deal of conversation. That is what I call good company." "You are mistaken," said he gently. "That is not good company, is not very nice. Birth and good manners are essential, but a little. My cousin Anne shakes her head. She is not satisfied. She is fastidious, my dear cousin," sitting down by her. "You have a better right to be fastidious than almost any other woman I know. But will it answer? Will it make you happy? Will it not be wiser to accept the society of those good ladies in Laura Place, and enjoy all the advantages of the connection as far as possible? This winter, and as rank is rank, your being known to be related to them will have its use in fixing your family, our family, let me say, in that degree of consideration which we must all wish for." "Yes," sighed Anne, "we shall indeed be known to be related to them. By far too much trouble taken to procure the acquaintance. I suppose," smiling, "I have more pride than any of you, but I confess it does vex me that we should be so solicitous to have the relationship acknowledged, which we may be very sure is a matter of perfect indifference to them. Pardon me, my dear cousin. You are unjust to our own claims. In London, perhaps, in your present quiet style of living, it might be, as you say, always acceptable as acquaintance. Well, said Anne, I certainly am proud, too proud, to enjoy a welcome which depends so entirely upon. I love your indignation, said he. It is very natural. But here you are in Bath, and the object is to be established here with all the credit and dignity which ought to belong to Sir Walter Elliot. You talk of being proud. I am called proud, you know, and I shall not wish to believe myself otherwise, for our pride, if investigated, would have the same object, I have no doubt, though the kind may seem a little different. In one point I am sure, my dear cousin, he continued, speaking lower, though there was no one else in the room, in one point I am sure we must feel alike. We must feel that every addition to our father's society, among his equals or superiors, may be of use in diverting his thoughts from those who are beneath him. He looked, as he spoke, to the seat which Mrs. Clay had been lately occupying. A sufficient explanation of what he particularly meant. And though Anne could not believe in their having the same sort of pride, she was pleased with him for not liking Mrs. Clay, and her conscience admitted that his wishing to promote her was more than visible in the view of defeating her. All right, and that is the end of chapter 16. And we'll pick up next Thursday with the first chapter of the second book from War of the Worlds. Okay, thank you all for popping in, and have a good evening.